Naeem Qureshi, Chairman. I would like to invite Mr. Naeem Qureshi for the introductory note. Thank you.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Before I start my speech, I would like to request Madam Shamshad Akhtar, please join us on the rise. Please. Madam Shamshad Akhtar, former Governor, State Bank of Pakistan and presently Chairman SSGC. Mr. Nadeem Babar Sahab, Special Assistant to Prime Minister on Energy and Chairman Energy Task Force. Bahadur Shah Sahab, Chairman, Vice Chairman and Acting Chairman NAPRA. Mr. Suhail Bhatt Sahab, Mr. Awais Mir, and all distinguished guests, Assalamu Alaikum. I welcome you all the first ever conference on LNG sector for Pakistan. The Energy Update, in collaboration with the leading partners and sponsors, is organizing the first ever conference on LNG for Pakistan 2020 today. The interactive event is being presented by Energy Update with the strong support of Ministry of Energy, Petroleum Division, Government of Pakistan, Dynamic Engineering Automation, and Federation Chamber of Commerce and Pakistan. Of course, our sponsors are our strength. Energy Update is very much thankful of its leading sponsors for their active support to make this event successful. We are thankful to our sponsors, Pakistan Gas Port Limited, Angro LNG, Pakistan National Shipping Corporation, SSGC, Flare and Unutilization Gas Processor Association. The objective of the conference is to address the issues relating to the Pakistan energy requirements that will be the fueling industries, transportation and power generation sectors in future, as well as meeting demands of end consumers in the domestic sector. Eminent national and international speakers will be invited as guest speakers in this upcoming conference, and today some international speakers are here, and we are thankful for their contribution and support. So it is joint venture to benefit the end users and strength of Pakistan to overcome the energy sector crisis and move towards energy sustainability by 25 to 30. The Energy Update hopes that this conference will prove as a milestone for development, progress, and promotion of overall energy sector of Pakistan, particularly LNG industry. Thank you very much.
Sessions and presentations by energy sector experts who are present here. The main objective being the development of sustainable future of LNG in Pakistan, thereby strengthening our energy security and arresting the demand-supply gap in the energy sector in a cost-competitive, the global context, and then talk about LNG in Pakistan. As the world transitions to cleaner and more sustainable energy future, LNG will play an important growing role in the global energy mix. As per Shell LNG Outlook 2019, LNG continues to be the fastest growing gas supply source, with an expected compound annual growth of 4% a year between now and 2035, led by Asia and Europe. The same study suggests that projections to 2035 estimate that more than 70% of energy demand growth will be met by gas and renewables combined, with gas supplying more than 40% of the additional demand. China, India, and other major importers putting policies in place with preference for gas over coal. This trend is expected to continue for a reasonable period of time. A look back at the 2018 global LNG market shows continuing strength, with delivered volumes reaching 319 million tons during 2019. 35 million tons of additional LNG supply was added, and the expected volumes for 2020 are going to be 384 million tons. However, there is a potential for a supply shortage developing in the mid-2020s unless more LNG production project commitments are made and final investment decisions reach soon. On the demand side, marine LNG continues to grow strongly. There are currently 143 fuel ships on operation and 135 on order. 2018 saw a number of announcements from across the marine sector supporting LNG shipbuilding and infrastructure development. I would like to talk about the uncertainty that exists in the international geopolitical environment, because of which certain LNG projects are either stranded or their financial investment decisions have been delayed. The following changes in market conditions are also worth mentioning. Going into the 2020s, that has an impact on the LNG supply chain going forward. Number one, the US has gone from being an importer of LNG to being one of the largest exporters in a very short period of time. Current LNG infrastructure projects are designed to take advantage of the great shale revolution in the US and corresponding upheaval in the supply-demand dynamics. The emergence of US LNG exports are the most significant development affecting the global LNG trade over the last few years. The decoupling of LNG and crude oil with the introduction of Henry hub-based pricing formula, combined with the elimination of destination clauses, removing restrictions on cargo destinations, and allowing divergence from US LNG sale and purchase agreement, has contributed to accelerated growth and liberalization of the global LNG trade, including the spot market, which accounted for 30% of total LNG trade in 2018. Qatar, too, is increasing its production and liquefaction capacity to beyond 77 million tons per annum to maybe 100 million tons per annum. Australia is also building a robust LNG structure and export of LNG. LNG is making a key contribution to support the development of variable renewable power generation. Alongside the significant growth in the physical trading and delivery of LNG on a spot basis, the industry is seeing an increase in the development and volume of financial trading of LNG, largely in the form of future contracts. LNG future contracts have been around for a few years, but meaningful penetration and growth in trading volumes emerged only in 2018-19 period. Small-scale LNG and floating LNG is another development. International Gas Union forecasts a rise in annual global demand of SSLNG to 30 million tons in 2020, going up to 95 to 100 million tons by 2030. Demand being split over, power sector will be taking 26% of small-scale LNG, marine LNG will be 32%, and trucking at 42%. As a consequence of the above changes, LNG sellers will be operating in an increasingly oversupplied global market in the foreseeable future, thus facing a problem of whether and where they will be able to find a home for their cargoes. However, the determining factors for LNG sellers of existing built capacity in the world markets will be governed by liquefaction capacity, available of large LNG carrier ships, and regasification and storage terminal capacity. And of course, it goes without saying that at the user's end, there has to be storage, gas transmission lines, and gas distribution networks to take that regasified LNG. Now, I would like to state some key challenges that the global LNG is facing, which can be perhaps part of our discussion today during the course of panel sessions. Number one is continuous low oil prices would mean that the new supply infrastructure will face headwinds and delayed final investment decisions. Change to business contracts after shale gas revolution, as we all know. Increasing spot market transactions and decreasing Henry Hub gas prices. Cost reduction in renewables is a big challenge to LNG. Effect of climate change agreements, how to reduce environmental impact when developing LNG infrastructure. I think this is one aspect that we do not give much attention to, but LNG infrastructure does have climate change implications. Finding equilibrium between fair pricing and sustaining investment in infrastructure for future. Number 5, which is very important, is geopolitical uncertainties delaying financial investment decisions on many supply infrastructure contracts. But now geopolitics is influencing the direction of the supply also, that a powerful nation will be able to sell its LNG comparatively easier than a smaller player. And then short-term oversupply of LNG, which is at present, the result of which prices will be low, will be affecting the long-term constrained supply. As a result of just above mentioned changes and challenges, there are few questions that we will need to talk about. And the questions are: one, when will be the time that commodity exchanges and future markets in Asia, with their own spot and hub prices, will have sufficient liquidity to launch new LNG projects? Two, will lenders be willing to finance projects with long-term contracts? If long-term contracts will still be needed, do these to be traditional, long-term or short-term? Can LNG portfolio players launch new greenfield LNG export projects without long-term contracts? US LNG exports have established a specific business model. Could other models emerge in the future? Contractors have traditionally taken on construction risk for LNG projects. Are there other possible models which might be there to adopt in future? Six, pre-FID cancelled long projects, LNG projects, recently, an impact on LNG supplies post 2024, because that is the time when oversupply is probably going to finish. One of the key issues hindering the development of LNG as a global commodity has been the lack of physical trading hubs in different regions, and that needs to be developed as well. Now, talking about Pakistan gas and LNG scenario, a study conducted by Bloomberg suggests that Pakistan gas demand is expected to rise by 1% year on average over 2040 period, and reaching approximately 51 billion cubic meters per annum from the current 41 BCMPA, out of which this LNG demand could reach from 7.7 million tons in 2017 to 35.4 billion tons by 2040. Since LNG price is linked to crude oil, it is still considered economical compared to other energy sources, including the efficiency factor for the power generation capacities and per unit costs. LNG is more efficient, cheaper fuel, with average domestic prices in 2019 being $11, this is an average, 11 per MMBTU for LNG, $12.6 MMBTU for furnace oil, $19 per MMBTU for LPG, $20 per MMBTU for high-speed diesel, and $20 per MMBTU for MoGas. So we can fairly see that LNG, on a comparative basis, is an economical fuel to have. Industrial and residential sectors in Pakistan will lead the demand growth. Gas demand in power generation will be arrested by renewables and coal in Pakistan by 2030, unless the new coal plants are banned by 2030 and beyond, which we are not certain about. The next demand forecast methodology would take into account the competition and cost of alternative fuels. To facilitate higher LNG imports, Pakistan would need to build infrastructure, such as regasification terminals, transmission pipelines. Currently, Pakistan has 2 FSRUs which are operating, and the permission for 5 has been given recently. Next is the transmission lines, that yes, we must have transmission lines. Our present transmission lines from south to north capacity is probably 1.2 billion cubic feet per day, and that needs to be significantly increased before we have another FSRU or onshore terminal. LNG market development in Pakistan is cheaper than furnace oil by 20% on average, offers more efficient electricity production through combined cycle power plants of 60% efficiency compared to 38-40% efficient furnace oil for power plants. Finally, lack of regasification capacity, since it poses a risk to LNG supplies, as demand growth is likely to outgrow our regasification capacity by 2021. I feel it is important to highlight some of the flaws in Pakistan LNG supply chain, and can be summarized as follows. Most of Pakistan's LNG imports are based on Brent price indexation. Besides the inherent flexibility of the public sector and the procurement rules and procedures, and very important is the demand variation of LNG leading to suboptimal utilization of terminals and cargo delays or cancellations or readjustments against contracted volumes. Pricing structure of LNG is the image of complex LNG procurement and administrative structure that involves multiple stakeholders in the supply chain, which is PSO, SNGPL, SSGC, Angro. Each stakeholder in the supply chain adds to per MMBTU cost for the overheads and resulting in expensive LNG delivered to the customer or RLNG delivered to the customer. Suboptimal utilization is becoming a major pricing issue. RLNG consumers are affected by a cost loading due to idle capacity of two operating terminals. The next is system losses. Arguably, Pakistan's entire public sector is operating inefficiently, and gas companies transporting these expensive gas imports suffer a 10 to 11% system loss that gets built into the pricing at a certain degree. And we know that gas transmission lines have a capacity constraint. Now, some of the suggested solutions. A comprehensive, coordinated, and integrated demand planning of LNG and all competing fuels on short, medium, and long-term basis is an absolute must for conducting LNG business in Pakistan in the future. It is proposed that the private sector should be allowed to import LNG to reduce idle capacity. This will pave the way for optimal utilization of LNG terminals while opening avenues for private participants in the RLNG value chain, which will result in competitive prices and lowered financial risk for the government. 3, bring down the weighted average cost of LNG procured. Since we are now tied with the oil-indexed contract, so one way to bring down the weighted average cost would be to increase our supply chain capacity and bring in more cargoes at spot prices or at a cheaper rate. The increased distribution capacity of LNG through additional pipelines or small-scale LNG through road transportation is another way of avoiding the capacity constraint in terms of pipeline transmission. So small-scale LNG where we can transfer LNG in liquid form to the point of user area destination and regasify at that area, at that point. Pakistan needs to open up the entire LNG supply chain to the private sector, from import to transportation and down to retail sale, with simultaneous pricing reforms for the gas sector in order to materialize a cost-effective contribution to the economy. Conclusion, as a result of what I have said, is that I believe that the economic justification of LNG import compared to alternative fuel imports is largely justified in the short term, and more so if we can avoid a GDP percentage loss of 1 or 2% that has happened in the past by plugging the energy efficiency gap. Moreover, it makes economic sense to import gas, which is used as a feedstock for fertilizer and petrochemical industries, and do the value addition indigenously for local consumption and export. Likewise, since CNG infrastructure is already in place due to heavy capital investment, in the past, more of the imported cheap gas can replace maybe expensive gasoline or HSD in the transport sector. Pakistan needs to move fast towards the next phase of LNG import capacity expansion, along with the government approvals of 5 new terminals. And my final concluding remark, and I will say, long-term outlook for Pakistan's gas demand may face hurdles also on its growth path, as longer-term Pakistan is installing a lot of coal-fired capacity, and as well as renewables, and some is based on even indigenous cheap coal, partly funded through China's BRI initiative, which may slow gas demand growth from the power sector, and the same goes for renewables in the long term. Whatever happens, the primary energy mix of Pakistan in future should be very balanced, optimum, and competitive, with a clear bias towards indigenization. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mir gained rich experience working with SSGCL as a project coordinator in the Managing Director's office. In the following 2 years, he spent a significant amount of time working on strategic gas launching of LNG projects of SSGCL. Mr. Mir is also found with the aim of improving and enriching the lives of the unprivileged to better healthcare, education, community, and sports development. Now, I would request Mr. Awais Mir to come on stage.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Welcome to our. Thank you very much for your quite big introduction, although it's been not to be on. Gas scenario to 40 years back, being pipeline infrastructure, which is the best in the whole region, and then from its demand perspective or demand and consumption perspective, surpassing all other economies, which drive 5 years, although it was an effort of last 15 years, which we should not forget, which gives the momentum of it. We used to forget our historical perspective in our oil and gas sector, specifically in the gas sector, because we set up our LNG 2, we have LNG 1, and he was being told by my seniors 2-3 decades back that we used to have given the training to the Koreans on our pipelines 3 decades back on our designing. So as far as the capacity of this, it has to be all, what I can say, that it has to be harnessed, it has to be motivated them and optimized. You need to the balanced approach on the demand side of it. You are creating the terminals, you are feeding your energy thought, but at the same time, if your economy is shrinking and if the GDP is not balanced, but our industrialists also need to make it a little bit open up with their balance sheet, because they are the profit-driven economy, then the balance can never achieve, if you guys understand from where I'm coming in. Tool, obviously a strategic fuel. So other part which is missing in our, may not being on the historical side, but which has to be seen now is our onshore LNG storage, or means terminal. Then we have, in a short term, we need to have, obviously looking after like an FSRU-based solution. We would have on a point that there are talks and there are companies following like Anglo for the capacity investment capacity and taking into account. Now, very briefly, what we would like to cover and what my threat would be, we would like to launch as one of the energy forum of Pakistan by virtue of taking this ordinance genius here on the energy sector. We have the history which very few countries. What is the issue with us? The issue is only what I see from the perspective of spending like 10, 12 years in the gas sector, that we start to come, or even the development of the CNG sector. I am giving you a little bit of a haphazard thing, but just to manage it off, that in our energy perspective, we created the mushroom growth of CNG, hurdle in our industrial development, quote unquote. So what it is, that we do not create the balance forum, that there are forums. We have, I don't want to discredit on PIP or OCSC and others, but what is missing from a full guy who's setting up a wind, knowing that there is an RLNG scheming power plant coming up. Advise the outlook. Well, somebody was telling me from IGU that Pakistan has 2-3 different set of database or this, I'm referring to Energy Book, IR Book, even the Koreans who were surplus in the last 4 decades in the gas, they do not have that kind of an integrated scenario or integrated database to support it. So why we don't use these numbers, why we do not calculate our numbers of demand supply perspective in a right manner that drives the new project development. Other thing we wanted to have it, our missing link with the international market.
we are a member of IGU and WPE. They are driving the demand and supply of the many fuels, not specifically onto the commodity. But our presence do not being connected with these affiliations. So this forum would like to cover that. Capacity building, as I said.
LNG at that time was such that close to 95% of the LNG produced was done on a contract basis, point-to-point basis, and the spot market was very, very small. Most of the terminals at that time were land-based, and the pricing was disconnected, where the price of gas in the United States was in the $3 range, the price in Europe was $9, $10 range, and the price in Asian markets of Korea and Japan was $14, $15 range. So there were three different pricing mechanisms going on. So with those three benchmarks, now let's look at where the LNG market is today. Well, there's close to 30%, I'm told, that is not on long-term contracts. It's either spot or very short-term basis sales. Most of the terminals that are now being built are FSRUs, not land-based. There are still a few that are land-based. And the price divergence is shrinking. And now you see LNG out of the US coming to India, delivered around $5.5, $6. You see compression of prices, the three different continents having three different prices, they're all converging. This is not unexpected. In fact, this is what was predicted. But with these changes, let's try to look ahead. All of you in the industry and on the government side, we would not be leaders in our field if we cannot anticipate what's going to happen in the field. And if we do not anticipate, we will be left behind. So let's try to see what we expect 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now in the LNG markets. Suhail Bhatt talked about a lot of things. He gave a very good overall canvas of energy. And I'd say a lot of things he said, I not only echo, I agree with, and we are trying to implement. But before I answer the question that I've posed, I have to step back for a second and say, one major disruptor in this entire equation is what's going to happen on the electricity side. And people perhaps do not realize what's going to happen on the electricity side. So let's first talk about that, because that's going to have a major impact on what's going to happen on the LNG and gas markets. Right now, if you look at the total energy pie in the world, about 30% of it is electricity, which is not a primary form of energy, it's a secondary form of energy. But it is projected that in about 15 years' time from now, this number is going to rise to about 40% of the total energy pie. So electricity will start taking a larger and larger share of the total energy pie in the world. And it is projected again that by 2050, let's say, or 2055, this number could go up to close to 45%. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that the primary sources of energy, while they continue to have their role in the global economy, still the dominant role, but more and more primary energy will be converted to electricity and used in the form of electrons as opposed to BTUs directly. What's driving this? A lot of different things, but let me mention three themes. First is ingress of electric vehicles. I'm sure all of you have heard that many major manufacturers in the world have announced that by mid-40s, 2040s, they will either stop making combustion engines or they will be making electric vehicles as the majority and combustion engines as a minority. So that's one trend. Internet of Things, we've all heard about it. People perhaps don't realize what it means. But in the coming decade, you will see that everything in your life is effectively being run through your phone or some gadget in your house. Of course, if you can pay for it. May not happen as quickly in the less developed countries, but that technology will be available that you can really control everything in your life. How you live, how you socialize, how you interact, how you work through an instrument. And that instrument, of course, is going to need power. And the third is what we all call generally this big blob of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And what is that? Well, if you look at the industrial revolutions, in the first industrial revolution, we shifted from muscle power to machine power. Then we moved on to communication revolution, make information move across the borders freely. Then we went to digital revolution. And now we're going to go to AI revolution. And what AI revolution is going to do is what the first revolution did, which is shift the muscle or animal power to machine power. Now we are going to do that with the brain power. So we will stop using our brains as much, which is unfortunate, and we will have machines do that for us. And of course, all those machines need power to run. I can go on, give you other themes, but bottom line is there is going to be a drastically increasing share of electricity in the overall energy pie in the next 10, 15, 20 years. When that happens, the question that comes up is, how do we generate this additional power? And everybody talks about renewable energy taking up that space, and surely renewable energies will take up that space, but not the only technology that will take up that space. There will continue to be other traditional technologies. And when you look at other traditional technologies, coal has gone out of fashion, and my prediction, I won't be around to be held accountable to it, but my prediction is in about 20 years, oil will be out of fashion completely, and gas will be left. And who knows, another 20 years after that, gas goes out of fashion. But certainly for the next 30, 40 years, gas is not going out of the fashion, and gas is going to be that dependable fossil fuel which supplements the variability of renewable energy. And of course, battery technology can change that, and we will see major developments in the next 10, 15 years on the battery technology. And that technology, depending on how quickly and at what cost it develops, it may transfer some of the projected demand from gas back to renewable, because renewable starts becoming more dependable energy as opposed to variable energy. So with these trends, the question is, where does the LNG sector go? Well, from the policy side, I'll make a few observations. In the last year and a half that I've been associated with the government, I keep hearing that we have capacity shortages in this sector and capacity shortages in that sector. And I have come to the conclusion that we really don't have too much capacity constraint in most of our sectors. We just have high level of inefficiency and high level of protected structures. And unless we get out of this mode that all problems end, the solution to all problems ends with the government, and so whenever we have a problem, any industry, let's just go knocking on the doors of the government and ask for a handout or ask for policy protection. Unless we as an industry get out of this mode, we are going to remain in stone ages compared to the rest of the world in terms of our industrial productivity and efficiency. And energy is no different. Our energy sector is highly inefficient. We need to make it more efficient, and only then can we lower the cost. Our dilemma is that while LNG, as Sohail Sahab said, while LNG on a BTU basis, or gas generally on a BTU basis, is cheaper than other alternative sources like oil and coal and LPG, it is still disproportionately more expensive compared to the purchasing power of our people. So how do we deal with that? Typically, anywhere in a developed country, what you'll see is that if somebody has a disposable income of 100, the utilities don't cost them more than 8-10%. And then you have other things like rent and food and education and whatnot. In our case, the utilities, both gas and electricity, end up costing 30-40%. That is absurd. That is not sustainable. We need to deal with it. And what the reason for that inefficiency is that we have protected ossified structures in our industry. And gas is no different. We need to open up these sectors and we need to bring our costs down. And unless we open them up, we cannot bring those costs down. So with that overall view, what is the government doing about it? Well, as you know, the government decided that the government must not continue to increase its footprint in the LNG industry. It should actually shrink that footprint. And with that view in mind, we went ahead with open access on the pipelines. We are going ahead with open access on terminals. And we've gone ahead and said there is no bar on setting up an LNG terminal. You want to put up a terminal? Go put up a terminal. If you have your buyers, if you have your suppliers and you have the financial muscle to put it up, have at it. We support you. We create the environment, you do the business. That is where we need to go. And only then will we be able to lower the cost. It is true, one of the things that Sohail Bhatt sir talked about, it is true that our LNG cost delivered at our border versus delivered to the customer, there's a huge markup in between. We need to deal with that. That is something for the state to deal with. But when private LNG comes in, the pressure will be on the government entities to reduce those gaps and lower the costs. So with that direction, clearly the government is very keen to develop this sector. Any major transformation comes along with pain. And this will be the case here too. But what I want you to understand is that from a policy perspective, we are agnostic. We are agnostic whether it's LNG coming in and getting regasified and going to our consumers, or whether it is import pipelines bringing gas in the form of gas from a neighboring country, or whether it is our local gas that we increase. We are agnostic, but for one exception. And that exception is we do have primacy of indigenization. So to the extent we can produce more domestic gas, more hydrocarbons, yes, we want to do that. But beyond that, whatever our shortfalls are that have to be imported, we have to look at it holistically. So if an import pipeline can bring in gas cheaper, well, the pressure is on you guys as private sector to bring LNG cheaper than that. On the other hand, if the dynamic is the other way around, you'll have more business and import pipelines won't come in. It is not in the interest of the government to make commitments or create an environment that results in commitments with a higher cost of energy than what is otherwise available through alternatives. And so you have to remember that unless we make our economy more competitive through bringing down the costs of energy delivered to our industries so the factories can run and employment can increase, and delivered to our consumers so that the affordability of that electricity improves, having availability in of itself doesn't serve any purpose. Having a lot of energy available, whether it's in the form of electricity or gas, if it's too expensive for the consumer, only results in more theft, more leakage, and constrained demands. I'll just conclude by giving you 2 or 3 numbers. Roughly 85 million tons oil equivalent consumption of energy in Pakistan for a population of 220. Do the math. We are highly, highly starved per capita in terms of the energy usage. Look at the electricity side, 530 kilowatt hours per capita per year. Highly, highly starved. Why? Because energy is expensive. You make energy cheaper, you will see these numbers double in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So when we run out our projections, and I'll conclude by the last theme that Suhail Sab and Awais touched on, perhaps it is a well-kept secret by the government, which it shouldn't have kept a secret. We are working on a complete integrated energy plan for the next 25 years. We already have one for the electricity side, and in the next few months, we will have one on the gas and petroleum side. And then we will combine the two and come up with an overall integrated energy plan, which will define the choices from the policy point of view as to what it is that we need to do over the coming decades to be not only have sufficient energy availability, but also affordable energy for our people, while being sustainable at the same time. Those three pillars are essential. There's a fourth one that people often ignore, and we are one of the worst offenders in that too, and that is wastage of energy. We have no focus on conservation and energy efficiency, and we need to deal with that. We cannot continue with reckless abandon of having shortage of energy, having expensive energy, and yet wasting that energy. We cannot do that. So rest assured, the government is not asleep on the wheel here. We are working on integrated energy plans, but what I want you to understand is that in these plans, the government is not intending to and should not be saying everything is for the government to do. It is going to be the private sector. The markets have to be opened up. The markets will be opened up. And in the last 16, 18 months, some of the decisions we've taken, I've been in the energy business globally for 32 years now. I tell you that in the last 16 months, some of the decisions that have been taken are so momentous that our children and some of us who are younger will see the major impact of those in the coming years and decades. We don't realize those things right now, but we have been living in the past and we have been denying the present. And that is, it can't be more true than the energy sector. We have to move the energy sector to where it needs to be in lockstep with the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
With your permission.
5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have short time, so we'll open the forum for question and answer. Please keep your questions very brief.
Lucid and clear that nobody has any question. Yes, Mohsen.
What we just highlighted is really a breath of fresh air for my ears. And I remember when I was developing the first energy project in Pakistan, you were the first customer that I contacted in the private sector. So we go a long way back in this. And one of the things that we also discussed in those days was the implementation of combined cooling, heating, and power systems and distributed energy systems. I would like to have your views on that and whether you are now going to concentrate on that, because that is one of the things that this country needs desperately. If you look at our power generation plants, especially in Karachi, you will see that the efficiencies are varying between 30 to maximum 50%. And then you have further losses of up to 30% transmission and distribution. And in one stroke, if you replace it with CCHP systems and distributed power systems, you bring the efficiency up to 83%. And that is something I would like to see done in future.
Let me address that. There are two parts to your question. We are preparing a policy where we will shut down every power generating plant that is below a certain threshold of efficiency. and we will keep raising that bar in the coming years. We have to do it gradually, we have to do it in organized fashion, not to create too much disruption and possible supply constraints, but we not only intend to do that, I have drafted a policy to that effect already. And we just need to go through internal governmental process to convert that policy into an action item and a decision. The second part of your question was relating to combined heating and power systems. You are absolutely correct. That is the need of the hour. That is one of the components of what we need to do. Frankly, when I look at everything we have to do to bring our policies to current day technologies and current day practices, there's such a long list that if I work 24 hours a day for several years, even then I won't be able to finish it. So it is very much on the agenda. There is already work going on that. And my expectation is that probably sometime end of this year, we will be coming out with some policy structure for combined heating and power mechanisms as well. Anything else? Ji Mubashir.
Please, might be here.
Sir, thank you very much. It was very informative, very inspiring. My one question is, now we are seeing last 2 or 3 winters, when we say in a short-term planning of the LNG, that every time we are short of that LNG quantity, the result of that is that most of the cheaper plants which are to run on LNG, they are stopped and we are running the fossil plants. There may be some more underlying reasons for that, but my question is that if something is being done, that now there is one ministry which is energy and then there are 2 divisions, that off-taker can rightly predict the right amount of LNG so that petroleum division can buy that.
Very good question. There are deeper reasons, but I hope everybody realizes that the situation this winter was much better than last winter. We do have short memories, so we forget what happened last year, but this winter has been significantly better. But to answer your question specifically, we were bringing in 1.1, 1.2 BCF all through December and through January. Today is the last day of January. So it's not that we weren't bringing it in. Our problem was, and these numbers may shock you, that in the summer, in the SUI Northern system, summer 2019, the average sale to domestic sector was 488 mmcf. Last winter, December 2019, the average sale was 831. So it went up from summer to winter last calendar year, it went up about 70%. This winter, we peaked at 1,231. 1,231. 250% of what we were supplying in the summer to the domestic sector because of the extended and much colder wave that went on for 6-7 weeks. As a consequence, while we were running the system close to full on the LNG side, we had to divert more gas to domestic to support that. The planning was done. Week by week. And the planning, when I look at how much additional gas we had to divert to domestic, if we had not done that, we were actually right on the mark in terms of what the projected demand was by power. And as I said, the reasons were a little deeper and frankly beyond our control. But we have now started a mechanism where we do 6-monthly planning, monthly planning, and weekly planning on how much LNG is needed by the power sector. We still have to deal with the pricing aspect because it seems very strange to me that LNG is on the margin, on the merit, and because of the price. To give you a sense, the delivered price to power plants were getting LNG today is just a little over $10. If this were somewhere in the order of $7.5, $8, which it would be at today's pricing and without too many markups in between, all these plants would be running ahead of several other plants that are currently running. So it's not as simple, and we are on it. Last question, Akhtar sir.
You have opened up LNG terminal business. What is the reaction of investors and their response? Are they coming up?
We have a fantastic response. Two of the major investors who are proceeding are here. I see Makino-san from Mitsubishi. I see the whole team for the other terminal. The third one I see sitting here. They are going in a little different direction. The response is tremendous. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that the approval structures and the list of things people have to do is very daunting. And Makino-san will tell you, Saad will tell you, we've had 3 rounds where 3 federal ministers have been sitting there trying to speed up and resolve these list of approvals and conditions that have to be cleared. And I'm happy to say that we are making progress. These gentlemen can tell you their view. Our difficulty has been the structures that we've imposed upon ourselves in the past, and we need to dismantle those structures. If the federal government is not taking any financial obligation other than ensuring safety, why should I be bothered that you have to get 18 different approvals from me before you can proceed with doing business? And that is really what we are trying to do now through the ease of doing business process. All right, one last question, then I have to go. I have some people waiting. G.H. Rasab, question.
Question is, sir, the pricing structure, which every month change, for us, it is very difficult to keep up our budgets and financing arrangements, and not only the LNG, but also this electric power also. So I hope there is some consideration for this.
There is a lot of debate that has happened on that internally, and I think in the next 30 days you will see some announcements where we will come up with a better method of predictability and better method of some short-term stability in terms of pricing structure. Again, realize that we have inherited a pricing structure that I can only say it is ossified. It has been operating for many years. And if I were to give an example, whenever our system has faced a problem, rather than identifying the cause of that problem and trying to address that problem at its root, we have always decided in the past to come up with a new regulation to address that problem by law and by force. And that has resulted in our system, while the whole world is moving towards deregulation, we've actually moved toward re-regulation. And that has resulted in a situation where things that have no relevance have become part of rules and laws, and we really need to dismantle it and move towards a better system. We're working on it. As I said, the agenda is so long that we have to every day worry about what rises to the top of the priority, and often it's the crises that force some items to rise to the top of the priority list, as opposed to going through an organized fashion in dealing with these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here at first ever LNG conference of Pakistan. I would like to thank our valued sponsors, conference sponsors. Without their support, it could not be possible to execute such a successful event like that. Thank you all for your strong support and active participation. Thank you.
I would request Mr. Naeem Qureshi to present memento to our worthy chief guest. Energy.